I hope you can all hear me. Okay, the Great Locomotive Chase. This event may not be the most significant in the Civil War, but it is still one of my favourites. It had all the elements of a great adventure: daring, danger, death, determination, and it's all true. It actually inspired not one, but two films. The 1920s silent film with Buster Keaton and the 1956 film with Piers Parker. I know that Roger's going to be covering those two films a bit later on. As everyone here will know, the North has far greater manufacturing capacity than the South. In 1860, the USA had more miles of railway than the rest of the world put together, and two-thirds of it was in the North. One way of winning a war, of course, is to destroy an enemy's ability to fight by destroying his manufacturing and supply capability. A civilian contraband smuggler called James Andrews had a plan. Moving. Nice. €14.
It's working. That's not plugged in. Should be. You have to hit that, I think.
Hit what, sorry?
You'll have to hit forward and back. Would you do that? Okay, so let's press hit.
Press that. Yeah, okay, no problem. Okay, that is policy is James Andrews. Now, Andrews used to smuggle quinine to the south and got paid for it. And having scouted around, he supplied information to the Union, and he got paid for that. So that led some people to suspect he was actually batting for both sides. Anyway, he approached General Ormsby Mitchell at the Union camp near Shelbyville, Tennessee, to propose a raid on the Western Atlantic Railroad that ran from Chattanooga to Atlanta. Mitchell had made an earlier attempt to steal a train, but the plan failed because the turncoat Confederate train driver who had promised to help simply didn't show up. The plan was for Andrews to travel by train to Atlanta, learn the route, obtain the timetable, and then, having successfully destroyed the track, bridges, etc., meet up with General Mitchell and his 10,000 troops and continue the wrecking operation. Andrews and Mitchell believed if successful, they could severely impair the Confederacy and its ability to wage war, and this could even lead to the end of them. 24 men, all volunteers, were chosen. Selection was a careful process because they needed at least 2 train drivers and men with some mechanical skills, as they obviously needed work done on the trains and they needed to be able to rip up the track successfully. The men were warned that they would be in civilian clothes in enemy territory and, if caught, be shot as spies. On April the 12th, 1862, they set off. They marched 90 miles from Shelbyville to Chattanooga in mud, rain, and lightning. They passed into Confederate territory. Their cover story was that they were from Flemingsburg County, Kentucky, and were marching to Georgia to join up with the Confederate Army. The tropical rain made travelling very difficult. Andrews, who had never been a soldier, thought one day's delay would cause no harm. Mitchell, on the other hand, who was a punctilious soldier and a former engineer and railroadman, thought otherwise and ploughed on. There was no way for the two groups to communicate. 2 of the men, Sam Llewellyn and James Smith, got stopped by rebel soldiers who did not believe their Flemingsburg story, and so the 2 men enlisted in the Confederate regiment in East Tennessee. Llewellyn quickly and successfully escaped. Smith, for whatever reason, didn't try. After 4 days, they all reached Chattanooga and boarded the train to Marietta, or Moretta, as they say locally. They travelled in small groups so as not to arouse suspicion. At their destination, they found food and lodgings. 2 of the men, Martin Hawkins and John Porter, forgot to ask for a wake-up call for the next morning, and they overslept. Hawkins was a train driver, so that wasn't a very good start. The next part of the plan was to each buy tickets to different destinations and board the train to the town of Big Shanty, known as Kennesaw. That, as you can see, is is the general as it is today. The conductor on the train was 26-year-old William Bill Fuller, and he would inspect tickets carefully. He would also come to play a large role in the unfolding events. At Big Shanty, should have a photo of. Yeah, that is the town at Big Shanty, which is now known as Kennesaw. At Big Shanty, 20 minutes for breakfast was called out, and the passengers and crew got out. The train robbers remained in their carriage as instructed. Only Andrews got out to scout around. After what seemed an age, he poked his head back in the carriage and told the men to make their way in an orderly fashion either to the boxcar or the engine. The problem they faced was that right by the tracks was a large Confederate camp called Camp McDonald. Cab also had guards keeping an eye on things. Fortunately, they did not really grasp what was going on. The raiders uncoupled the other carriages and off they steamed. However, 7 miles up the track, the train suddenly came to a halt. What was wrong? Had the adventure already ended? And were they about to be captured and perhaps shot as spies? The reserve train driver took a look and realized that the damper had been left open. Closed it, and the train soon got going. Meanwhile, back at Loretta, someone noticed the general was moving off. Both Fuller and a man named Murphy later both claimed to be the one who spotted it. Off they went running after the general. People laughed at them. What to do? There were no other locos nearby, and the nearest telegraph was 7 miles away. A man rode off on horseback and found a loco called Pennsylvania. The army were in charge of this loco and was so slow they never got past Big Shanty. Further up the track, the raiders came upon Cooper's Ironworks, and there, to their dismay, found a loco there called the Yonah. Stupidly, they did not try and put it out of action. However, having spun a yarn about being on their way to help General Beauregard, they managed to borrow a crowbar. The raiders had not brought any equipment with them with which to rip up the track, so as you can see, they weren't exactly very well prepared. They had used a crowbar and muscle power, and it delayed them for over an hour. Bill Fuller and 2 accomplices continued running after the train. Fuller was helped by being extremely fit from all the work as a railroad man, grade being downhill, and by knowing every inch of the track. Having run about 2.5 miles, they stopped at the workstation where they were about to borrow a pole cart. That's William Fuller, as you can see. A pole cart is quite literally a vehicle put on the track and propelled along by a pole. They also acquired some helpers. They propelled themselves along, falling off once where the raiders had removed some track. They continued on until they reached Cooper's Yard, where they found the Yonah in steam and ready to roll. They climbed aboard and continued the chase. Further up the line, the raiders were delayed at the town of Kingston. Andrews spun his yarn about supplying arms and explosives for Beauregard. However, they were moved onto a side track due to unexpected, to the raiders, extra traffic. They had to wait patiently. The Yonah chagged along but was stopped by broken track. The pursuers were able to switch the underpowered loco William Smith, but at Kingston they faced the same problem as the raiders, too many trains in the way. Fuller had taken a real chance in racing away at 60 miles an hour, unheard of and dangerous speed and very poor quality track. He also knew that the freight train, the Texas, was coming towards them, and there was a real danger of a collision. That is the Texas. The general was speeding, but the Texas was only ambling out of Calhoun Station and stopped in time. The general, meanwhile, had to remain in the siding for some time. Eventually, Andrews got permission to move, and for added safety, a little further along the track, they began tearing it up. They were safe, or so they thought. Then they heard the unmistakable sound of a train whistle approaching. They sped off. The raiders were trying to get through the bridge to the Oostenaula River. It was a covered wooden bridge, and it would not burn. And if they could burn it down, there would be no way the Texas could reach them. However, the bridge was saturated due to the monsoon-style rain and would not burn. The next target was a tunnel through the mountains of the place called Tunnel Hill. Some of the raiders thought that this would be the perfect place to set up an ambush. Andrews said no. Although he was clearly a brave man, he'd never been a soldier. They explained his reluctance for a gunfight. Waller and the men in the Texas feared obstructions in the tunnel could destroy them. Both trains carried on, but the end of the raiders was nigh. Bill Fuller had managed to get a telegram through to General Leadbeater of the Confederate Army in Chattanooga. The city was in uproar. General Mitchell's Yankee troops were said to be approaching from Alabama and outnumbered the rebels. Now Yankees were also approaching from the east. He sent men out towards the general, and blocked the track. The general was running out of fuel. It used burnt wood rather than coal. It was also running out of water and objects which were mainly sleepers to throw on the tracks. They were out of options. Even an attempt to run the train backwards failed, mainly due to the lack of motive power. They had driven 89 miles. The Texas had driven 48 miles backwards. It was each man for himself. The Great Locomotive Chase was over. The men spread out all over the place, travelling in twos and threes through the woods. When found, some tried the Flemingsburg story, but whilst this had worked earlier, it now identified them as a train crews. Word had got out, and everyone and his dog, quite a few dogs actually, were after them. They were all caught. The two who had overslept and missed the train joined the Confederate Army, but their Flemingsburg story unmasked them. The raiders were put in prison in Chattanooga and placed in chains in the dungeon. Oh, not working again. There's the next picture, if I can ever get to it. There's a picture of the prisons. They knew. There we are. That is still there today. They knew they could not deny what they had done, and if convicted of being spies, they would be hanged. The only hope they felt was to say they were simply soldiers on a mission. That they were in civilian clothing would clearly count against them. The first person to be tried was the leader, James Andrews. A few weeks later, he received the verdict in writing, guilty, and the sentence was death. At this time, 12 of the prisoners were removed for some unknown reason to another jail in Knoxville, Tennessee. The remaining prisoners knew they were doomed and hatched an escape plan. The main thing was to get Andrews out. Any others who got away so much the better. They managed to make a hole in the floor of their cell. Andrews was kept directly below them. They hauled him up using a rope made of tied together blankets. They got through the roof, ran across the courtyard, and over the wall. Andrews got away, but 3 days later he was recaptured. The hanging was a ghastly affair. The rope got tangled up. The tall Andrews' feet touched the ground. He was gurgling and moaning and being strangled. Eventually, he died. Subsequently, 7 more raiders were tried and convicted. This time they were swiftly executed to reduce the chances of escape. The remaining prisoners were left to ponder their fate. They decided to write to Jeff Davis to ask to be treated as ordinary prisoners of war. But no reply was received, and so they then decided to write to Braxton Bragg. Bragg knew nothing of the case and so decided to pass it along, and it eventually reached back to Jefferson Davis. Davis asked if there was any reason why they should not be treated the same as the others, and the reply he received was no. However, no word had been heard by the men, but they did actually receive some news from 2 black servants who brought them their meals and also smuggled newspapers. No news was bad news as far as the men were concerned. They knew they had to escape. They planned to overpower the jailer when he came to their cell, steal his keys, open another couple of cells, overpower the guards, and get out. They were lucky. The old jailer was alone and the guards were preoccupied playing cards. The men got out. 6 were quickly recaptured, but 8 got away. They travelled in pairs. 6 headed north, but 2, Alfred Wilson and Mark Wood, travelled south by river 400 miles, where they were very fortunately for them picked up by the Union Navy. Their thinking was that everyone would expect them to head north. They were already in the south. They'd be heading north back to their own troops. So they thought everyone's going to be looking north, we'll head south. And fortunately for them, it paid off. The six who did not escape were expecting the worst. However, they were put in prison where conditions and food were better than they had been previously. To their amazement, they were told that they were going to be exchanged. First, they were transferred to Richmond, and 4 months later, in March of '63, they were asked who wants to go to the USA. Well, as far as they were concerned, they were already in the USA, but they weren't going to make a point of it. so they all stepped forward. See, as the as the surviving raiders afterwards, and that is Edwin Stanton. And in Washington, they were called in to see Secretary of State Stanton, who congratulated them and gave them the Medal of Honor, the first recipients of this award. Stanton asked them what they wanted to do next and was delighted when they said they wanted to fight to the end. They were each given $100 as a reward and 6 weeks leave. 10 years after the event, they held a reunion with Bill Fuller as a guest of honor. Fuller was warmly applauded. They had all accepted they were simply doing their duty at the time. There is one further thing to add. Charles Priestley very kindly sent me some information, not about the raid itself, but something that happened just over 100 years later. 1967, Charles was teaching in Chattanooga. 62, sorry. Yeah, 62, sorry. Okay. 60, in 62, they had the anniversary of the event. The journal had been fully restored. It was taken around all different parts of the country. However, the mayor of Chattanooga, a man named Ralph Kelly, he went, no, this train, it belongs to us. It's ours. So he advised the police saying, no, block the train, don't let it go anywhere. But the people on station said, no, we're carrying on, we're doing what we're supposed to do. Well, if you do that, if you cross state lines, this is kidnap. I mean, it's quite unbelievable. And fortunately, in the end, it was all sorted out, and the general is where it is now in a fantastic railway museum in Kennesaw, which I think should still be called Big Shanty. Anyway, that's it.